My name is Dre. I'm a customer success engineer at Moveworks. I'll be our host for today's Creator Studio weekly webinar session. Some of the upcoming sessions I just wanted to call out really quickly. Today, of course, we're discussing Sailpoint IIQ access request approvals. But next week, we'll be discussing Manage Engine ticket approvals. I believe John will be hosting that one. And then the following week on the 9th, we will discuss Coupa purchase request approvals, excuse me. But again, today we're talking about Sailpoint IIQ access request approvals. So we're going to go over the content a little bit. This is actually a little bit more of a technically heavy one than maybe we've normally done or have done in the past. So I'm going to spend a lot of time on sort of the high level architecture and talking about which parts Moveworks sort of can provide for you, which parts you'll have to build on your own, how you might go about doing that. And then we'll move on to a Q&A session at the end. So if you have any questions, please go ahead and add them to the Q&A section of the Zoom chat. We'll get to them during the Q&A portion. So with that, let's go ahead and get started on Sailpoint Identity IQ access request approvals. So Sailpoint is a system that we do see in use across our customer base. So it's different than other systems that we integrate with. And the reason that is that it is sort of its own like standalone product. And what I mean by that is like normally you'll deploy Sailpoint IQ on-prem of your organization. So it's not super common that we'll see cloud instances of Sailpoint Identity IQ. And so for that reason, we're going to sort of discuss this from the perspective of it being on-prem. Now, there are instances where it's deployed in the cloud. And in that case, you can sort of skip over at least one part of how you would set this up. So let's go ahead and just look at the user experience, and I'll sort of explain as we're going forward. So in general, what we want is a proactive notification. Some user is requesting some new software or a license or access to something. And that request is actually taking place in Sailpoint. So we need to pull Sailpoint for these new requests. Then when we see a new request, we want to trigger an event triggered path. And once it's an event triggered path, it's not that different than any other event triggered path, any other kind of approval type use case. So, you'll send the approver a notification with the option for that approver to approve or deny the access request. If the approver says approve or deny, really whatever selection that they make, we go ahead and send that back to, in this case, Sailpoint, and the approval is actioned. So where this gets a little bit more complex again is that this is kind of an on-prem thing. And also Sailpoint doesn't really expose APIs for a lot of these actions, but what they do expose is the ability for us to install what are called a plugin. So let's look at what that looks like in our diagram. So again, this is a little bit more complicated than normal. So please ask any questions that you have in the chat or in the Q&A section. But let's just start with sort of the way that this is normally set up, right? So we're assuming Sailpoint Identity IQ is installed within your intranet. So inherently what that means is we don't have access to it from like a REST API right away, at least. So we need to build a REST API. The first step is going to be installing this Moveworks Sailpoint plugin. So this is something we provide. It basically is a set of code that you can install on your Sailpoint instance, and that exposes a handful of APIs that we need access to get this to work. So things like getting user identity information, getting pending approval requests, submitting an approve or deny. These are the kinds of sort of actions that this Moveworks Sailpoint plugin will expose. We can look at this plugin in a moment. The next thing is, because this is an internet-based system, we need to then build a gateway of some kind. So if you've ever experienced, or if you have had experience with the Moveworks, on-prem AD integration, on-prem Jira, on-prem Confluence, really the way that we normally do an on-prem integration is using our Moveworks agent. Now, I'm just using this as an example. The Moveworks agent is not capable of connecting to Sailpoint. So this is where things get a little bit we'll say custom, because again, I mean, the way that Sailpoint is installed on customer systems is varied. You'll occasionally see them in cloud, so it's like, it gets really, really specific to your organization. So I would recommend, if you want to build something like this, I mean, you're going to need to talk to your CS team. We'll be able to help guide you with building a gateway that allows us basically to contact those APIs that are being exposed through Moveworks, this Moveworks Sailpoint plugin, and it's going to provide us sort of the basic functionality of having APIs. The next step is going to be building a server. So the reason for this is that you actually need to build polling. Sailpoint is not going to have sort of a proactive, there is an approval that has been submitted, call an API from Sailpoint. So instead, we need to build a polling system. Um, what we can provide here is we do actually have a Python script that you can run on like a Python Flask server or something, that will then sort of expose the second layer of APIs that are going to do more complex actions that make it really easy to plug into Creator Studio. And then in addition, it'll do the polling. So you can go ahead and poll for new Sailpoint IIQ approval requests, and then actually trigger an event API using these scripts. So these scripts are something that will be published on our doc site, I believe, sometime this week. So hopefully we'll be able to share that maybe through the community post that I'll post after this call. But the high level of this is you'll need to create a server of some kind. Perhaps that can be like an AWS VM that has access to your gateway. In principle, you could combine the gateway and the Python or the server together, but it probably makes more sense to have them separated like this. And then once we've got sort of this basic architecture built out, we can then plug in Moveworks Creator Studio. So the very first thing, again, is that this Python script will be polling through the server for new approval requests. When it finds a new one, it'll send an event notification to the end user. End user sees that notification and responds in one way or another using a event-triggered path or a follow-up path. Their response is then sent back to the server, leveraging the APIs exposed by the Python script, which then call the APIs that are exposed via the gateway to the Moveworks Sailpoint plugin. So again, a lot of moving parts for this particular integration. We have seen it done, so we know it's possible and it works very well for those guys. But yes, again, I do expect there to be questions sort of at the end of the call. So please go ahead and share those. So this is, again, the high-level aspects of things. I did also want to mention this is an OAuth 2 integration. So there, of course, there's an authentication component here. So when actually building the connector, you'll do that using an OAuth 2.0 client credentials authentication schema. And then yeah, I mean, again, it's just an event-triggered path. I think if you've built in Creator Studio at all, you'll be familiar with the event-triggered paths. If you haven't, I mean, we have other webinars on use cases using event-triggered paths. And again, I can talk more about what that user experience looks like. But at the end of the day, this is sort of the experience that you'll have built. Okay, so I want to leave ample time for questions on this one. I keep alluding to that, so I'm going to go ahead and move forward. The first thing I wanted to do before we do that is just call out some additional resources that you can use to learn about building in Creator Studio. I need to get through these before we can get to the Q&A session, so let me just burn through these very quickly. The first resource that we wanted to share is our Moveworks Academy course called the Creator Studio Developer Certification. It's going to walk you through some basic use cases. It's going to share with you some, we'll just say guided training modules for how to leverage Creator Studio in different ways. And then finally, at the end of the course is a multiple choice exam that you can take, and it'll give you a certification you can share on LinkedIn. So that's kind of nice. I highly recommend going through this course. Definitely, if it's your first time building a Creator Studio use case, absolutely go through this course. It's going to get you up to speed very quickly. Finally, our documentation and developer community. So the documentation portal is your reference for all things Moveworks, be that Creator Studio or Moveworks Setup or any of the other functionalities or features that we expose that you guys have access to configure, as well as just information about our native skills too. So I highly recommend anytime you have a question about what can Moveworks do? What is the ingestion schedule? What does a particular functionality look like? Probably want to start in the documentation portal. And then finally, again, is our developer community. Think of this again as sort of like a forum that you can go and ask questions. You can get responses and have conversations with other customers, product managers, engineers, folks like myself. We're all in the community ready to answer your questions. So please come and ask questions there. And again, once this call is done, I'll actually create a follow-up post for this webinar session where if there are any questions that come up after the call, you can search for the post. It'll be the same title as the session that we're having today, Sailpoint IIQ access request approvals. And we can have a conversation there as well. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and open things up to the Q&A. I'm not seeing any questions come through. So what I want to do, maybe with some of the remaining time, maybe it'll spur some questions. I'll show the documentation for the Moveworks plugin. This will sort of show what APIs are being exposed. And actually, you could leverage these for other kinds of use cases too. So maybe we can call this like a bonus session. Let me share my screen here. First, organize this a bit better. Okay. Okay, so here is that documentation. Again, this will be published soon. We'll share that link on the community portal. So think of this, I guess, as a bit of a preview of what we'll be publishing this week. But this is the documentation of what we're actually doing with our Sailpoint IIQ and Moveworks plugin. So as you can see, it sort of goes into the background a bit. There's very limited out-of-the-box APIs, really doesn't give us the functionality that are needed for something like an approval notification use case. So this plugin is going to basically allow us to interact with a handful of Sailpoint objects. So that would be identity, work item, identity request, certification entity, work group members. So these are going to be the things that allow us to check to see what user is actually requesting that information. How do we associate that with their ingested Moveworks identity? What is the approval? That's going to be a work item in this case. That we need to then send data to the approver to give them information about the approval. And then just again, like the functionality, we need to actually submit the approvals. We need to identify who the approver is, who we are approving for, who the, what approval we are actually approving. All this is information that needs to be sort of configured in that final API call from the Moveworks follow-up path to the Moveworks server to the gateway. The server has, again, it's sort of an abstraction of even more API functionality. So you won't even interact necessarily directly with this, but I wanted to call this out that you could build more use cases using this Moveworks plugin if you wanted to tap into that directly. Alternatively, again, the server script we'll share shortly. It's being sort of last review today, I believe. So that'll be published soon as well. I can also maybe give a sneak peek of that if anybody's interested. And then these are the various APIs that the plugin exposes. The script that runs on a custom server would interact with these APIs, but the actual APIs you would configure in the use case would be a little different. But again, sort of these are the ones that you could maybe build off of if you do install this Moveworks plugin. So we have a Moveworks object list, allowing us to retrieve Sailpoint objects of a given class from your Sailpoint instance. So right away, it's sort of a pretty flexible API call. Moveworks object by ID API. So again, this is going to allow us to navigate objects, but this time being very specific to an ID. Moveworks table list API. API lets us fetch identity data and additional details for specific Sailpoint objects. So sort of a continuation, trying to get more information out of Sailpoint. Object action put. This is going to be the call that allows us to actually submit the approval or deny an approval. Work group get lets us fetch all the members of a specific work group. This is going to be important for basically who the approver is. The actual API workflow is down here, so you can kind of see what the API is going to look like, how you actually make those calls. So again, all of this is just information about how to actually submit those API calls. So I keep mentioning this. I apologize if I'm a repeating record, but you can definitely leverage these for other types of use cases if you are maybe using Sailpoint in a custom way that still leverage these objects. All right, I'll give us maybe another minute and a half, maybe 2 minutes. If you do have any questions, feel free to ask them. If you don't, feel free to drop off. I'll go ahead and close things up here in a moment. Um, but if you do drop off, thanks for joining us. I'll stick around for a few minutes just to make sure. All right, I'm not seeing anything else come through, so I'm going to go ahead and close things up. Again, look out for the community posts that I'll be posting here shortly. If you have any questions, let's correspond there. But thank you very much. Have a great week, and we'll catch you next week with managed engine approvals. Thank you very much.